started. So I'm going to go ahead, and recording has been hit. So we are recording. So first I want to say good morning from the East Coast. And it's very nice to see everybody. Nice to see some familiar friends and faces from the RPCV community, as well as seeing our staff as well. We are very lucky today to have Erin and Colleen, who are returned volunteers and also sisters, and have also had distinguished careers in service after their time in Peace Corps. And so before we jump into that, I want to turn it over to Kate for some introductory remarks.
I just, first of all, Erin and Colleen, hello. Good to see you. And of course, really great to see the volunteers that are joining us. I just want to say that it doesn't feel like business as usual. Watching from where I'm watching, what's going on in the United States is so hard, and I think being there is probably a lot harder. All of you, you went through the COVID-19 situation here and evacuation from your service, and now you went back to a U.S. that was different because of COVID-19, and now you have all of this happening. I don't know how you all are coping, and I just want to say how much I'm thinking about you. I don't know if people had a chance to read the note that I sent, but you are so on our minds, and this is just a very difficult time, and I don't know if anybody wants to say anything. I just wanted to give it a few minutes before we moved into the conversation with Erin and Colleen. And Erin and Colleen, thank you for allowing just a few minutes. If anybody wants to say anything, please do. And we can also actually, if people don't mind, I'd like to just have a moment of silence and community on behalf of all that's going on in the United States. So if you guys don't mind, we'll start with that. Okay, a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody want to say anything before we move forward? I guess I'll turn it back over, but I do just want to say our hearts are with you, and please, continue to stay connected with us. We're glad to see you here today. Feels like the world is upside down, and my hope is that we move forward into a better and stronger place, and it's painful in the meantime. So I'm delighted to see Erin and her sister Colleen here, and I'm gonna let Kyle go back to the program and step out of it and let Kyle take it. But Erin and Colleen, good to see you, and thank you again.
Thanks, Kate. And echo a lot of that, and it's just being in the U.S. right now is particularly challenging, and so thank you. So with that, we will transition into our conversation with Erin and Colleen, which I had a chance to send out some of their biographical information yesterday, so you can learn a little bit more about them. And as we have this conversation, as usual, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask a question. Also, feel free to put something into the chat box, which we ask, we'll go through some questions, but we'd really love to make sure that any questions that you have for Erin and Colleen, you have a chance to ask those as well. So with that, I would just like Erin and Colleen, if you could introduce yourselves, maybe talk a little bit about your service and, sort of your post-service, some of your post-service accomplishments or stories.
I'll let Colleen go first since she's the oldest.
All right, well, thanks, and thank you for letting me be here. And before I start, I just want to say that I do work for the CDC, but none of my opinions or thoughts represent CDC. They're all of my own. Let's see. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Burundi from 1991 to 93. I was a fisheries volunteer, and I was getting ready to start my third year as a volunteer, and was evacuated because of civil conflict. So I actually did my close of service in Tanzania because we had a very short period of time to get out of the country, and they evacuated us to the closest country. So I was in Tanzania thinking, what am I going to do? So I think a couple of us during our close of service, we were going through a similar process, figuring out what are the next steps? Is it graduate school? Is it taking a job? What can we do? Because I was starting my third year, I wasn't ready to go home. So I started to look at jobs with the conflict that was happening. And I ended up going to work for the UN World Food Program. And I kind of went back to working with the population that I just had left. But during that time, I also thought, okay, I need a plan here. And I thought I better go to graduate school and start that process. So I actually took time between my close of service and going to graduate school. It was about 2 years. So I worked in between at the World Food Program. And then through a number of different opportunities that came along, and even in graduate school, kept in touch with a lot of, I created a lot of networks. And then through those, I went to work for another number of organizations, did my graduate work, and then went back to working overseas again in various contexts in the humanitarian sector, and did that for a number of years, and lived overseas, and also had some headquarters positions, and then ultimately came to CDC. I've been there, this is my 10th year. I started in May of 2010. So I took a number of different paths to get here, and a lot of, soul searching to figure out what I want to do. And to be honest, that still goes on, because I struggle with, is this where I want to end up retiring, or do I want to look for something else? So I think that never stops. Always looking for the next thing, but also keeping grounded with my passions. So I'll end there.
So I guess I'll start. First, I do want to say, well, as a typical bureaucrat working for the government, I also have to say, any comments or opinions are my own and not that of the U.S. government. So any of you who are interested in working for the government, realize you normally have to put that up front. But I also do want to say thank you all. Thank you for your service, whether you were a volunteer for 1 day or for 2 years or in your third year, you're a volunteer, and your service is greatly appreciated, as well as to all the staff members for all your service to our country and to your country. So thanks. I will just give you a brief introduction. I also was a Peace Corps volunteer. I was a volunteer in Costa Rica. I actually did my 2 years as a youth volunteer, and then extended for a third year as a volunteer leader. Kind of had the Peace Corps bug. And then from there, decided I also needed to figure out where I was going. I didn't want to leave Costa Rica. I actually didn't want to leave the Peace Corps. To this day, the least amount of money I ever made in a job, and it's still my favorite job to this day. If I could convince my husband to go into the Peace Corps with me, we would do it upon retirement, but I doubt he will. I went and worked for, I went back to school and got my master's in social work. I wanted to continue working with youth and eventually became a child protection officer. But I also took a few turns along the way. While I was in graduate school, actually during my summer breaks, I went and was a Peace Corps trainer for youth programs. So I've been a trainer in 4 different countries for urban youth and development. That's what it used to be. And then upon graduation from my graduate program, I went and worked for, during my graduate program, I actually worked for a public health organization, an international public health organization in Boston called Management Sciences for Health. And one of the things Colleen mentioned was really creating a network. Never lose an opportunity when you're on an airplane, when you're in an airport, etc., to talk to people, because you never know where your next job is coming from. I actually was on an airplane heading to Paraguay to be a trainer, and I happened to tell the flight, she asked me where I was going. These were the days when you could stand in the back of the airplane and talk and stand around. She asked me where I was going. I told her Paraguay. I went into the bathroom. I came out. The flight attendant literally was like, "Don't go anywhere. The woman that just went in the bathroom is also going to Paraguay. I want you to meet her." Like, okay. And I actually landed a job with her. She worked for Management Sciences for Health. She asked me what I was doing. She said, "What are you doing when you come back?" I said, "I'm going to graduate school. I don't have a job." And she said, "Let's stay in touch." And I ended up working for her and doing adolescent public health work overseas with her. And then I completed that and went on to work with the International Rescue Committee. At the beginning of my career, after Peace Corps being in such a peaceful country of Costa Rica, I sort of became an adrenaline junkie and started chasing wars. And so served in a number of conflict zones as a child protection and education officer. And then worked for Save the Children, worked for International Rescue Committee, and in between there, came out of the INGO world and went full-time to work for Peace Corps. And I worked for Peace Corps for 5 years in Costa Rica. I returned to my country of service as a staff member. And then became the regional director of recruitment in New England. So I was actually with Peace Corps for 8.5 years. And as you all know, we get kicked out. And so then you have to find another job. So I went back to the NGO world and was overseas. I was in Libya when when the fighting started, and then decided, you know what, I don't want to have to figure out how to maintain my own safety. I'm going to go join the government where they'll lock me down if they want me to. And so I applied for USAID, and I've been now with USAID since 2013. I've served in Pakistan, Albania, and I'm now in Afghanistan. And like many of you, I was recently evacuated out of Afghanistan for the COVID-19 outbreak. And so sort of in a limbo like all of you, not knowing whether or not we'll go back or we'll continue working from home, etc. So I will end there, and then Kyle, go for it, facilitate.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Colleen. And I love hearing sort of your post-Peace Corps stories. And I think what jumps out is just sort of the variety of different experiences that you both had that seem to have really started with Peace Corps at the beginning. And so I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how did your Peace Corps service, and how were you able to, for lack of a better term, sell your Peace Corps service throughout your career, and to, you know, make that jump from returned Peace Corps volunteer, which you're always a returned Peace Corps volunteer, but from returned Peace Corps volunteer to, you know, into your career. are we going to continue with the age order? Are we, is it, have the sisters worked everything out? Is it? Okay.
We haven't, but I'll jump in. So I think just the whole issue of being overseas and having that cross-cultural experience, being able to sell that as well as language skills. So whenever somebody actually, even maybe I'm a little bit biased, but when I see somebody that applies for a position at CDC that we're looking to hire, if they've done Peace Corps, I already know that they are up on the list because they bring variation, and they also, we're not going to have to teach them some of the things that often people come into these positions and they've had 2 weeks of just going somewhere and then coming back, and then but not really getting into the various cultural aspects of working overseas, language skills, which we're always struggling with people who, we need in my position and also with Erin, but I work internationally. I'm in global health, and we're always, all of our work is overseas. And so being able to, go to DRC and we need somebody that speaks French. And we can't send somebody that doesn't have that other language, because then you become a burden on the team. And also I've had places where I have brought people with me who were learning, like doing internships, but I was the main person. I spoke the French, but they said, why do you even bring somebody that doesn't speak another language? Like so they feel like they can't communicate with them. So that's, that in itself, just being able to say, and I think Peace Corps is a culture in itself. And we know that it's going to make the situation, having somebody with those skill sets, resilience, that Peace Corps volunteers are resilient. And, we need that in this type of work if you're going to continue working overseas. And even if it's a domestic position, we're seeing people right now are in this current situation, having resilience is really important. And we're unfortunately thrown into this whole COVID thing where we can't, our networks are broken down, we can't see people. And so I think that that's really important. So those are the main things, is the whole cross-cultural, living overseas, being overseas, the language skills are something that you already come with, and you don't have to learn those.
I'd also add on to that, and sure all the volunteers that are listening, I know the word flexibility, it just seems like it's always thrown at you, but Peace Corps volunteers really are flexible. And I was, as Colleen was just reflecting on some of those skills that are transferable, one of the things that my USAID class, my Foreign Service Officer class that came in, there were 32 of us and 27 of us were Peace Corps volunteers. And so, I agree with Colleen, maybe I'm biased, but when I receive resumes and if somebody has been a Peace Corps volunteer, they actually go up to the top of that list. And, you have Albanian, but it means that you can learn a language, right? And so many organizations are saying, we need people with language skills. Yeah, you might need to go to the DRC, but we'll teach you French and we know you can do it. Whereas there are other people who don't have any basis of a language, and we don't know if they have that actual capability of doing that or taking the time to actually learn a language. Whereas Peace Corps volunteers have dedicated their time to actually being able to learn a language to be able to work effectively. I would also say there's a lot of empathy. Peace Corps volunteers have empathy. These are real skills that we don't see all the time, but there is this, I really do believe once you complete your service, you have this way of just being empathetic with people, and it's needed, especially in this day and age. Again, my own opinion, my own observations. there are many people at USAID whom I work with that weren't Peace Corps volunteers. And when you see them working with our host country nationals in our offices, I cringe sometimes because I'm like, are you kidding me? You can't speak to people that way. This is their country. Or I'll give an example. In Afghanistan, had a number of people who were not Peace Corps volunteers who are on my team, and they'll out loud will be like, these people stink. They don't take baths. They don't, you know, I'm like, have you ever thought about, like, they don't have running water? Or have you thought about the fact that, you know, perhaps they only have 2 changes of clothing? Like, these are first world problems, people. You know, we can change our clothes every day. The people that we work with, even if they're in the US Embassy, do not necessarily have the resources. They don't have the resources that we have. So I just think that Peace Corps volunteers really need to look at all of the transferable skills, even if you think that they're not transferable. You know, people are like, well, I don't teach. You do teach. You need to think about it in a different way of how you teach or how you learn.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know those are some of those themes we've, you know, I feel like we talk a lot about them throughout service and at ISDs and, you know, I think during the evacuation and since then, but agreed, those are skills that carry through any workplace and will take you far and wide. I'm curious, you know, thinking again about that transition and about what it was like when leaving service, and you've touched a little bit on it, but what was most challenging during that transition? And, you know, Colleen, I think with this group, especially since you were also evacuated, how did that also sort of impact some of those challenges? And then how did you overcome those challenges? So we can stick with the age order, or we can, you know, Colleen, you're the older sister, you could probably pass it back.
I'll pass it back to Erin for some we'll mix it up here.
The transition, I think the biggest transition for me was I came back to New England. For those of you who are on the East Coast or in New England, you know it's pretty homogeneous. There's not a lot of diversity here. And it was a real loss for me. I mean, sure, we have pockets of Latinos and we have pockets of, you know, Ethiopians or pockets of Armenians or Albanians or so forth. But I thrive in an environment where there's diversity. That was one of the hardest things. The other hard thing was going into a graduate program where no one was a returned Peace Corps volunteer and no one understood where I was coming from. I just spent 3 years overseas learning a foreign language, living and working in, you know, really difficult environments. Again, I think just personally, one of my challenges was that I look at, you know, what people see as issues in the United States are first world problems. Like we complain about things that are not really worth complaining about when we compare it to people that we work with. And then just timing, like I knew going to graduate school was a building block to get where I needed to be, but I was really impatient. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be back overseas. And so I needed to kind of step back and be like, no, this is where I need to be right now. And I need to take advantage of where I am right now and figure out what it is here that can help me build additional building blocks to get to where I want to be.
Okay, so for me, it was a little bit different because civil war broke out in Burundi, and I didn't even get to say goodbye to anybody in my town that I worked with or any of my farmers. And so it was like we had 2 days to evacuate and we were gone. And so it was very challenging for us as a group because, again, we didn't get to say these goodbyes. And we were evacuated, and like I said, I was not ready to leave. I was getting ready just to start my third year. So there were 4 or 5 of us again in our close of service. We thought, we're not ready to go home. We do have these skills. We have language. We just came from working in Burundi, and there's refugees coming across the border. So we said, we sold our skills. We know the population, we speak the language. And so I actually, it was kind of good because I had a little pod, a little group, 4 of us that were all hired. And so we went together, we did all of this, and we were hired. But at that time, I did have to think about, okay, what's next? Because I can't, do this right now and stay here. I do have to think of something else. And that's when I went to grad school. And I did find it challenging, but I did go to a program where they did have a lot of Peace Corps volunteers. But I thought, okay, what do I want next? And that's what kind of drove me to, I don't want to say drove me, but I was thinking about graduate school anyways, but the timing was put in front of me. I had to take it earlier than later because I could go on working in this area. So I think that, it was, those things were very challenging. Also, I was very vulnerable at that time because we left and we didn't have a job. And I will be very honest, I cried and cried. I didn't know what to do. And it was really something I remember calling Erin and saying, I'm not ready to come home yet. But I want to come home, but at the same time. So again, just looking at various options. And I think that it's a little bit hard right now and challenging, but people are hiring right now. And they're like, we're onboarding people using Zoom, and we don't get to meet we're doing interviews and we're doing all these things. So life goes on and there are jobs out there. It's just trying to find out at the time, and maybe it's not your dream job, but it's at least, again, a stepping stone.
Yeah, and actually that, I think, kind of segues into something I would love to hear a little bit more about. And, I love what you just said about maybe it's not your dream job. And actually, I remember my very first job out of Peace Corps was working my first paying job was working in a call center, making phone calls on behalf of a union that was trying to get someone elected. And it was my first paying job before I eventually got my first full-time job working for Peace Corps. And remembering that time and clocking in at the work center at 5 o'clock in the afternoon for a 6-hour shift that was going to have me calling random people in Minnesota. So I would love to hear, Colleen and Erin, I guess, you've talked a little about your first jobs after Peace Corps, but talk a little bit more about that networking, because Erin, not all of it happens outside of airport or airplane bathrooms. How else might networking? Can you talk a little bit about that? Finding that job, finding that inroad.
Sure. I think one of the things about networking, this is like my 6th Zoom with RPCVs. Another country asked me to do some COS stuff, and I've had so many conversations with RPCVs from other countries over the last 3 weeks after doing a Zoom. They're like, can we contact you? Would you look at my resume? Don't be afraid to ask people. There really is a network out there. There are RPCV Facebook pages, there's RPCV, blog sites, etc. Don't ever be afraid, or LinkedIn, to just reach out to someone and say, hey, I saw you on LinkedIn. That makes me sound old, I know. I saw you on LinkedIn and you do X, Y, and Z. Can I just talk to you? And I've had random conversations over the past couple of months since COVID has happened. I've even sent people to Colleen. I'm like, these people are interested in public health. Can you talk to them? I don't know them. I can't vouch for them, but they're Peace Corps volunteers. They got evacuated. And so I would definitely say that, like, you can't hold yourself back. You got to put yourself out there. It's not always comfortable putting yourself out there. But if you want to get to where you want to get somewhere, you got to put yourself out there. I'd also say, anybody who's planning on going to graduate school, use those professors. They're in those positions because they have the experience. Listen to them, ask them. They may no longer be overseas and they may, you know, be stateside for the past 15 years, but they've been there, they know people, they, you know, can connect you with people. Even your own peers. You know, we all think, oh, well, she's just a Peace Corps volunteer, or I'm just a Peace Corps volunteer. Yeah, but that woman who was a Peace Corps volunteer, her aunt or her mother or someone else may work in a field that you're interested in. So I would say to definitely just keep your eyes open and never lose an opportunity for a good conversation, right? And networking is really one of the biggest skills you have to have if you want to get to where you have to get. I'm going to be really honest with you. It's not always about your resume. People are getting jobs because of people they know. I mean, that's a reality. And so you need to keep that in mind. Like, okay, who do I know at this organization who can connect me to someone else in this organization, so that I can just be seen, just so that my resume can be seen. So was there another part of that question, Kyle? Sorry.
I think you captured. I think you captured it. It's just about networking and that first job. And Colleen, I see your finger just about to take yourself off mute. So.
I just want to build on what Erin said, and I think the world is your network. And I've had jobs where I've applied, and my first job with IRC, I applied, I didn't hear anything, and next thing you know, the supervisor or the person doing recruiting called me and said, "You'll never believe it. I'm hiring you because I just got an unsolicited recommendation from somebody that you were in Peace Corps with." And so that was like, 5 years before. And so again, start with your Peace Corps peers. I stay in touch with them. Also, like Erin said, parents and your friends of your parents. And also, I'm always referring people. I'm always thinking about people in my network when I see a job come up and I'm like, oh, I think this person, they had mentioned that they were looking for a job or interested in transitioning. And so I, say you should get in contact with this person. Sometimes, as Erin said, it can be a little bit awkward because you're like contacting people that maybe you've had no conversations with before, but I think people are willing to do it. People did it for me, so I'm, stepping up and I'll do it for them. And I, again, had also last week 2 Zoom calls with people that daughters of some of my friends who are just finishing undergrad and saying, I'm looking for internships. I'm looking for what should I do to get to the next step? So again, the world is your network and you should monopolize on it and take advantage.
I'd also like to add, Kyle, I remember when I was working in Peace Corps Costa Rica, and a new country director was coming in, and he came in and he said, that I just had to volunteer for a whole year. He was a returned Peace Corps volunteer, but he went back domestically and worked for the rest of his career. And then at a certain point in his life, he's like, I'd really like to go back and work for Peace Corps. And he couldn't get his foot in the door. And he said, I had to go and literally volunteer for an entire year for an international organization just so I could have it on my resume that I've been back overseas. So volunteer opportunities are also key in terms of helping you build those blocks to get those jobs that you may want. And I love my job. I have to say, in my entire career, I've never woken up a day and said that I hate going to work. I'm pretty fortunate. I love what I do. When I joined USAID, I had to take a huge pay cut. I mean, I was working for the international development world with contractors, but when I decided that I wanted to join the Foreign Service, there was no negotiating salary. And I had to decide, do I want this in my career, or was the money more important of where I had, built myself up? I came in as a junior officer after having been like a director of organizations. And so sometimes you just take those leaps and say, you know what, for me, in my career, this is what I want to do. And you just have to be flexible with it. And sometimes you eat humble pie. You're like, okay, my boss right now is 17 years younger than me, does not have the experience, but guess what? She teaches me new things every day, and it is what it is. And she got into the Foreign Service years before I did. And that's just how the cookie crumbles. So again, just always look for opportunities and realize that anybody can teach you skills and help you get to where you're going to get to.
Well, I think the other thing is, you don't, like, I didn't really have a path. I knew that these were things that I wanted to do, go grad school, do this, do that. But I took a lot of paths that I did not think I would ever take, and it's brought me very much joy.
Thank you. And I think with that networking and just being open to relationships that you were just referring to, Colleen, and I think with whether it's job searching or looking for that next opportunity, you never know where it's going to come from, and you'll be surprised oftentimes. And I know it's when we've had some of our post-service career sessions, we've talked about wanting to be focused in your job search, but it's possible to be focused and open simultaneously, and building those relationships, and looking towards a certain direction, but also being open to things. And for my own story, I remember when I was networking in DC before I started working for Peace Corps, I met with someone who my DMO had put me in touch with. So I reached out to my former DMO. He put me in touch with someone who was just joining the State Department. He said, I currently don't have any jobs to offer you, unfortunately. He says, but let me put you in touch with a few friends. And then that's what eventually sort of started opening doors. And it was, meeting with people. And I love the way that Colleen and Erin both put it. People love to pay it forward when it comes to career planning and career advice or networking, because we've all been there. We've all been in that position, looking for that foot in the door. And we all remember Eli Teichman was his name. I'll never forget Eli Teichman, meeting him, and the doors that he opened helped me open. And whenever I'm in a position to help move people forward, I remember that too. So Kate just put into the chat box, and I would echo what she shared. I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask questions to Colleen and Erin, and make sure that if there's any questions out there, that we have a chance to address those. And I guess while people are thinking of their questions, I want to pull back on something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Colleen, about that feeling of vulnerability that you said you felt after your service, and how I think the earthquake, and how your evacuation had possibly played into that. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that, and how you managed through that period of time? Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think that struck a chord with me, and would love to just hear more.
So I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't ready to come home. And so I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have a job. And so I just felt like, oh my gosh, it was very overwhelming for me. But like I said, I did have a few other Peace Corps volunteers with me, and they were in the same boat. But I also reached out to family and friends, even though communication was not what it is today. It was very limited since I did my Peace Corps volunteer service in the 90s. And so it was just trying to take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm okay. I, didn't get hurt in the conflict. We were evacuated, but these are the things I need to figure out. I didn't want to be a letdown to and say to my parents, okay, I have to come home now and I don't have anywhere to, go. But at the same time, they were like, you come home, please. So I, like I said, took a deep breath and said, okay, just sat down and kind of mapped out some things on paper and said, okay, I know I want to do these. What do I need to do? And just, it was okay. Like, it was okay to feel that way because, it was nobody's fault that it happened at all. And just trying to like keep an open mind about things and not, just say, oh my gosh, everything's happening to me and I don't even know what to do. But there are things to do. There are opportunities there. It all worked out. And it was for a very short time that, because again, this wasn't the plan. And so I had to make a new plan. And so that's what I did, was take a deep breath and say, okay, the plan that I had before didn't work. So what do I need to do? And kind of mapped it out and had a very good support system. And like I said, I actually stayed overseas, went to work, and my parents were fine with it. They said, if that is what makes you happy, then we're supportive and, you can do that. So again, don't get too anxious and overpowered by the anxiety, because it all does work out, and there are opportunities out there to do whatever you think that you want to do. Over.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've got a question into the chat box that I think I'll read out, but I think, Erin, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. So if someone is interested in working towards an eventual career with USAID, are there any factors in addition to Peace Corps and grad school experience that would help?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to add something when Colleen said, I was worried I had to go home and live with my parents. I'm 50 years old. I got evacuated. I'm living with my mother. I mean, with my husband. You know what, everybody, it's okay. Just be okay with it. So Matt, yeah, I would say there's a few things I would suggest if you're interested in working with USAID. There's a number of ways of working with USAID. So I'm not sure if you mean as a direct hire, as a contractor. One piece of advice I would provide to people is understand what hiring mechanisms are, right? Because a lot of people apply to USAID contractor positions and then they get the position and they realize, I'm not a direct hire. I don't have those same benefits that direct hires have. But you do work for USAID, right? So just make sure, one, that you really educate yourself in terms of what that position is. Number two, in grad school, so really know what it is you want to do if you want to work for USAID. We have a lot of civil servant positions that are direct hires. And then we have the Foreign Service, which is a very different hiring way to hire, what they look at, how they hire you, everything. And so you need to decide, do you want to be based domestically and travel overseas, or do you want to sign on the dotted line and say, I'll serve anywhere? And when you sign on that dotted line, that means you can go to Kabul for 2 years, or you're going to South Sudan next, or you're going to Libya after that, right? So to definitely know what it is you're looking for. I would say if you haven't gone to grad school yet, during grad school, either look for an internship or look for work that you could be doing that would actually add to your skills. And I would also say, make sure that you're reaching out and doing informational interviews with people. Get people to know who you are. And I would, another thing with USAID, and I believe with Peace Corps and I think CDC, hiring is done on an algorithm frequently. You're putting your stuff into a system. And so if you're not using the words that are actually in the solicitation, you get thrown right out. You could be the most highly experienced technical individual and have 25 years of experience, but if you're not answering those questions correctly to the algorithm, you're not even going to get your foot in the door, unfortunately. So make sure you're asking people to look at your resumes, to look at your applications, and really make sure that your applications are answering the questions that the application is asking. I hope that helps.
I think that's very helpful, and I think there was a lot in there about different types of career types, and I think some of those things is information you can learn from the USAID website or government, USA Jobs, also from networking, from conversations like this, from talking with people who might be able to provide some of that clarity. So I think that's very helpful. And Colleen, I would ask a similar question, and maybe about the federal government or CDC or just alternative agencies from USAID.
The process is very similar. We have civil servants and we have many different contractors, but I do, a lot of people aren't able to get in through the civil servant mechanism. And so again, a stepping stone is that they take some of these other positions. You still work for the agency, you're still part of the team, but you may come in on a 2-year contract instead of being a civil servant. But that has been, I know in my branch where I work at CDC, we have a number of people who, that's exactly how they started. They started off in some of these fellowship programs and also some of these contracting mechanisms. And then because they are part of the team and they, they're great. And then when a position did come up for a civil servant, then they already had a little bit of a leadway because people knew them and they, had worked there. So even if you want to work as a full-time civil servant and there isn't a position, then maybe again, as a stepping stone, take a different position and then kind of work your way in until the opportunity arises.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think all that's really good advice. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. I want to, again, pause and see if there's any questions, and make sure if there's anybody who's thinking about taking themselves off mute has the opportunity to do so.
I just want to say one thing is that also keep an open mind, because when I was in Peace Corps and I, again, was fisheries, I have a biology degree. I had no idea what epidemiology was until I started meeting people and wow, or other people that were doing other things. And I didn't even know those careers were out there. And so again, keep an open mind. And even if you want to do something, I was thinking, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go and maybe I'll go into teaching, or maybe I'll go into laboratory, or I had no idea what I was going to do. I have a biology degree, but because I met all these people and again, networked and had an open mind, it led me down a different career that I didn't even know that existed once upon a time.
Yeah, exactly, that openness. And Jerry, I see you've taken yourself off mute.
Yes, Kyle and everyone, I just wanted to inject networking again. The gals did a tremendous job about networking, but I just wanted to interject. The first time I came home from the Peace Corps, one of the goals of Peace Corps is to bring it home, bring our service home, and to tell people. And when I got home, the local newspaper approached me and did an article on me and my service in Micronesia. And then the radio station and then the television station also wanted to do an interview. Within 4 weeks of all those interviews, I had 5 job offers when I returned. So networking, the way the ladies injected is excellent, but don't forget one of the goals is, and especially today with the bad news out there at every corner, people are looking for good news. They want something to feel good about, and telling our story to the people around you can have mass greatness for all of us. And I just wanted to inject that. It certainly worked for me.
Yeah, can I add something to that? Thank you, that's awesome. I think the other thing is, that third goal, reach out to your Rotary Club, reach out to your Lions Club, say, hey, I'm back from the Peace Corps. Can I come and present? They're always looking for people to present at their meetings. And often we don't realize that. And those are places that you would meet people that you normally wouldn't meet. So thanks, Jerry. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so third goal, the education landscape is shifting. I feel like I see a lot of my friends with children who are having their Zoom classes and opportunities to present there. But, I think what struck me about what Jerry just said was there's a quote that I love that says, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. And I feel like that what Jerry's talking about is by continuing to do the work, and in this case, continuing to do the third goal work, can continue to create opportunities. And that's, you're working towards obviously something, sustainable, something long-term, but you just never know. And whether it's on an airplane on your way to Paraguay, or after doing a radio interview, or after speaking to a group of students, and one of those students goes home and says, today we had this very interesting conversation about this place called Albania, or this place called Montenegro, and you just never know where things are going to go. And so I love the stories that were told, because it just captures that sort of openness. Colleen, I'm curious if the working for the CDC is, I think the CDC is now more important than ever in this age of COVID. Just wondering if there's anything you are able to talk about, and how what sort of thing, how might the future look in this age of COVID, and with just how the world is evolving.
Things will get better. As soon as we have a vaccine and treatment, then we'll be on our way. But I think it's, again, thinking outside the box. And we're trying to figure out how do we get back to the new normal, and not just stay in our houses. And I think, again, it requires a lot of innovation, creative minds to come together and say, how can we do this a little bit better? So I think things will get better. And like I said, there are still jobs out there, and it's just a different way of getting hired and a different way of doing things. We're learning too, and it's been really hard for someone like me who's getting older with the new technology, and we're coming online with all these new things. And so and it's a bit overwhelming, but we're working, and I work in an environment where it's all teamwork. And so I'm like running into people's offices all the time, and that's not happening now. And I'm on a team right now for COVID, and there's 36 of us on this one team, and I only know one person or two people out of all of them. So trying to figure out personalities and how to work with people that you can't even, have a sort of interaction with, except for on video chat. But I think that, again, it's going to, our resilience, this is going to make us better. We're going to learn how to do things in a new way, and probably better.
Thank you. And it will get better. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainties as well. And so thank you. And thank you for the hard work that you and the CDC are doing. There's another question that's come into the chat box, and this is about speaking to the general understanding of Peace Corps by NGOs or other organizations. How much do you feel that you have to advertise Peace Corps compared to USAID, which seems to have a more implicit understanding of service? So I guess talking about as you're selling your experience and educating people about Peace Corps, and how has that been throughout your careers?
So for me, am I still on? Am I on? Okay.
We hear you.
I don't think I've had to actually sell Peace Corps. I've worked with agencies that are, I've worked with a lot of international NGOs. I've worked with some of the UN agencies, and I think that they're aware of the great work that Peace Corps volunteers do. And also at CDC, I really, again, haven't had to sell it. I think that maybe if I was in the private sector, maybe I might have to, because even my friends who don't work in this type of work still don't understand Peace Corps. So I'm having to at least educate them a little bit. But I would say in the work that I've done with the international NGOs, the UN, and also with CDC, I think Peace Corps has a great reputation. And so I haven't really had to sell it because they already know what it means for people coming with those types of skill sets and that kind of experience.
Erin?
I agree. I've never had to sell it. I mean, I've worked with INGOs that are based in the States, that are based in the UK, you know, and worked with the, you know, work with World Bank and IMF, and they all know what Peace Corps is. They know that Peace Corps volunteers are thrown out there to survive, survival of the fittest. And if you survived, they know that you're going to be okay, you know? So I don't think there's a lot of having to sell your Peace Corps experience. What you have to do is when you're interviewing is really sell how those skills are transferable. But to have to educate people about Peace Corps, not in this day and age in the international field, not so much. Also in teaching in the United States, I mean, there are so many returned Peace Corps volunteers who are teachers, and they bring people in to speak as RPCVs to their students. And so it is well known. As I said, I was the director of recruitment for New England. And I was impressed about how domestically, how much people do know about the Peace Corps. It's a very small minority of the United States that does not know what Peace Corps is.
So I'm going to jump in because I think that I think in some of the private, like for-profit world, that there's probably a larger number of people who don't know it. And I would say, rather than trying to explain to them like what Peace Corps is, I would talk about the what your experience was. And I think I want to just say, I can't emphasize enough what Erin has said a couple of times, which is figuring out how to transfer what you learned and gained through your experience to the skills that job is looking for. And I've heard volunteers say, and I feel like in the 2 weeks before evacuation happened, I heard a volunteer say that they don't know how to train, that they're not a trainer. And I think like that is so far from the truth for anybody who has served, or education, like whether even if you didn't teach in front of the classroom, you were educating people about why they should be invested in the environment and trying to get community energy around a grant that you were doing or something, you know, and then you're going in and pitching it. So think about the skills that what you did in your service and how they then translate to the job. And when you're talking to somebody about Peace Corps, you know, certainly the commitment to live overseas and to be in a community where you didn't know anybody and you might have been the only person who spoke English, and some of the things that I think are really remarkable about Peace Corps service that you know, can draw out to show them your can-do, will-do, resilience, your ability to persevere. I think all of those soft skills are so needed in today's jobs. A lot of it can transfer easily. And I'm sorry to be jumping in, but I do think that there's a lot of people out there who don't know it. I think Colleen and Erin happen to be in professions where it's very well known.
Although when I went to work for the World Food Program, we had to convince them why they were going to hire 4 26-year-olds to the UN. And we said, we just came from Peace Corps. We speak the language. We've lived in this country. So we sold those skills. And there were lots of people applying for these jobs, and they hired all 4 of us. So.
Thank you. And so we're coming up on an hour, and so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I think before we break, I'd love.
Yeah, I could talk for hours.
I'd love to give an opportunity for any words of wisdom or advice, and you've already shared so much. but anything to leave us as a group with as we all move on forward.
I'll just say to everyone, be kind to yourself. Our country right now is in unprecedented times. I mean, none of us have experienced what is being experienced in our country right now and around the world, to be honest. Be kind, be gentle to yourself. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to get those jobs that you want. That exudes out of you, right? So I would say, you know, it really is important. Self-care is really important. And you will be okay. Everyone will land on their feet. I can guarantee you that. You'll all be okay. And, you know, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Kyle and Kate can share my email. I'm sure Colleen feels the same way. You know, just we can send you to other people to talk to, but don't ever feel like you're alone, and take care of yourself. And again, thanks to everybody on this call, both staff and Peace Corps volunteers, for your service to the United States and to the country of Albania. It's a real privilege that we are all able to serve our country in a different way that most people think what service is to the United States. I mean, we're often overlooked, you know, it's always about the military and their service. And I highly respect the military and their service, but we also serve our country, and you all need to remember that. Thanks.
That's a hard thing to follow her. So I just want to echo a lot of the things that she said. And I want to thank you again for inviting me, and thank you for your service. It's a privilege to, it's always a privilege to meet another Peace Corps volunteer. So again, my email is, you know, reach out to me if you have any questions. If, again, I can put you in contact with other people through my networks so that it can become part of your network. So thank you again.
Thank you both. That's incredibly generous. And after this, we will be sure to follow up and send out contact information for both of you. So thank you.
We just posted it on our Facebook page. So no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I've been live tweeting. Everyone else has been live tweeting, I'm sure. Okay, so with that, so thank you. We will share that afterwards, and that is incredibly generous of both of you, and just the time that you spent with us today. I know you're both very busy dealing with workloads, and just everything is the work continues. And so thank you both, for Erin and Colleen, for taking the time today to speak with us. Before I turn it over to Kate to kind of wrap us up, along with sending out some information on following this call, we've arranged for a call next week as well with some additional RPCVs who work. One RPCV who works at the U.S. Embassy in Podgorica, and one who works at the Embassy in Tirana, as well as Ambassador Yuri Kim, the U.S. Ambassador to Albania, who has leapt at an opportunity to meet Peace Corps volunteers. We would have typically already had a chance to meet with Ambassador Kim, either at swearing in or training events, but we are very excited that she's going to be able to join us. And so we'll be sending out that information this afternoon. And so again, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Colleen. This has been a tremendous conversation. And so with that, I will stop talking and I'll turn it over to Kate.
I don't really have much to add, except it's good to see all the names here. We think about our volunteers all the time and appreciate you being here. Erin, became a very good friend of mine when she was here, and I know she mentored specifically a couple of her volunteers around some of their projects, and she walks the talk on does. And she and Colleen are an impressive pair of sisters who come from an amazing family. So thank you both for taking time out of your really important careers and the work that you do to spend time with us today. So thanks everybody. We look forward to seeing folks back on Thursday. Thank you. Be safe, please. Thanks. Bye.